Part 1. Into the Forest. Chapter 10. Lady Brinley.
Lady Brinley Fanger. I'd always known my father would sacrifice me on the altar of power. It was a daughter's duty to improve the family's situation, no matter the price she would personally pay. I just hadn't thought he'd be so literal about it. Since my 12th birthday, I'd been betrothed to Arjun Amberflayer, Marquis of Missenlam, the Duke's eldest son and heir. My father considered the match quite the coup. I was less enthusiastic. Lord Arjun was neither handsome nor ugly. Nor was he particularly witty nor kind. Or even extremely intelligent. But he was vicious and power-hungry like his father, Maas, which pleased both our fathers immensely. Women clamored around Lord Arjun. But as far as I could tell, his main claim to attractiveness was his position and wealth, not his person or personality. He'd been rumored to be loose with the maids since puberty first struck him. He consorted with whores. He flirted with ladies and other men's wives. I had no illusions about what marriage to him would be like. My only hope was that after producing several heirs for him, he would leave me alone to pursue my own interests. I would certainly be happy enough for him to pursue his. In 3 months, on my 18th birthday as proscribed by law, my father and the Duke meant to marry us and consolidate the power of both their seats into what would be tantamount to a princedom. And why not? The royal circle and the southern kingdom would never accept us in their halls of power. We were forever banished behind the Douve, which kept us isolated. But the law of unintended consequences favored us, while the Douve separated us from the rest of the kingdom, confining us into this harsh climate. We were also protected from attack by the great dark forest. It was a natural barrier, better than any moat or ocean. If we had our own king, which the Duke practically was already, what could the royal circle do? And why should they bother? The tax money we sent to the palace was a pittance compared to other provinces, a mere drop in the royal treasury. Though if the palace knew the plans my father and the Duke had for alliances with other kingdoms and the trade they would establish. Neither my father nor the Duke trusted the other, but the sheer magnitude of the power the combination of their territories would create forced them into the marriage contract. A betrothal was legally binding, only a king could break it. But it also wasn't a marriage. I was pure and untouched. Just what a king like King Kylan IV would want in a bride. And he was, by law, free to choose me as his next Selectress if he so wished. The king's edict commanded that all single young ladies between the ages of 16 and 22 in the province, betrothed or not, present themselves as candidates for Selectress and his hand. He wanted the choicest of us all, and the largest choice available to him. Even so, we were sparsely populated. The farther north one went, the sparser the population grew. Only the Duke's territory had more people than ours. The king's choice from the southern lands and territories of our village were limited, at best. Fewer than 50 young women from father's territory, perhaps 3 times that many from the Duke's. The rest of the province was hardly worth traversing, unless the king was very desperate not to take a wife anytime soon. From the moment the edict arrived on the wings of the sad news of the latest Selectress's death, everyone in the outlands knew I would be chosen next. We were first on the route north out of the Douve, but there wouldn't be any need for his men to go farther. No one even bothered to doubt that I would be the king's choice. I'd been raised to be a duchess, the most powerful woman of the region. Without meaning to brag, simply stating the truth with all due modesty, my accomplishments were many. I could sing and dance and play all manner of musical instruments. My embroidery was as fine as anyone's north of the Douve. I'd been taught to smile and flatter and charm men while not appearing too forward or ever crossing the line into impropriety or impurity. I could read and do sums. I'd been trained to manage a large estate. I'd been schooled in manners and the ways of court, such as we understood them. I had the finest clothes available here and was always beautifully turned out. But most important of all, I'd been bred for beauty. And the king wanted a beautiful wife. What a fool to prize that above all else, especially when I and so many young ladies of my acquaintance had so much more to offer: love and loyalty, intelligence and good sense. Even large dowries, if one was inclined to be mercenary about things, which seemed more of an incentive to marry than fleeting beauty. My father had married far below his station in pursuit of the goal of turning out handsome sons and beautiful daughters, trying to breed out the valor of his ancestors that had produced the six-fingered curse. My poor ancestors were probably rolling in their graves at the knowledge that the current Earl was ashamed of their sacrifices. Father had succeeded only in producing one living child, me. He had 5 stillborn sons and 3 more stillborn girls. Breeding for beauty wasn't as easy as it seemed. The curse ran strong and killed the weaker stock. I was now his only hope. Father had been in a foul mood ever since word had come that the king's party was coming through the Douve, not around it. If the Douve could be breached, or traversed in this case so easily, the plans father had made with the Duke were in peril. We weren't as isolated as we'd imagined. Further, what did safe passage mean? Only one possible thing: a treaty with the Fairy Queen. That was a danger no one wanted to imagine. I twisted my hands in my lap as I waited for Mariah, my lady's maid, to bring me breakfast and dress me and do my hair. I studied my hands, so close to having only 5 fingers each. The 6th was barely noticeable. But barely noticeable wasn't good enough. I'd never dreamed, none of us had, that anyone from my generation here in the Outlands would have a chance of being a Selectress or Queen. Yes, we had a young, eligible king. But there were too many other provinces in the line of succession ahead of us for any of us to have serious queenly dreams. Girls 10 years younger than me had a chance in the future, maybe, if a queen died in childbed. Those just being born had an even better chance to wed a prince in the future. Or so we had all thought. Then the king's first Selectress drowned in a crystal-clear bathing pool in the king's private lagoon. She'd been found with her long hair floating around her, looking peaceful and beautiful to the end. No one could imagine how the accident had happened. From all accounts, she was an accomplished swimmer. There was no sign of a struggle or violence. Even the court physicians were mystified. The next Selectress fell down a flight of stone stairs to her death. She made a beautifully tragic picture, we heard, lying at the bottom of the stairs with her golden hair and skirts fanned around her. The third choked on a bone in front of king and court at a banquet in her honor. Unlike the other two, not a pretty death at all. But then, she'd been the least pretty of all of them to begin with. Hers weren't a handsome people. Why should anyone have believed the king would wed and bed her? That left us next up, between the king and the woman he was rumored to love. Some of our people were beautiful in the king's standard, but none of us were perfect. And the new queen had to be both. I thought our people were all beautiful, each in their own way beautiful and each unique. To top it off, we had beautiful spirits as well. We were known for our charity and kindness, for seeing past appearances. At least we had been, until the ways of the court began invading our culture and permeating our corporate thinking. I loved the variety in our people and would have done anything to preserve it: the gentle wave of a too short arm, the gleam in the single eye of an old man, an extra finger or toe here and there. What other province could boast of such a range of looks and talents? After the third Selectress died, Father and the Duke had talked of at least bedding Lord Arjun and me quickly to secure their power. There was no need to take a chance of me being chosen. The king could be angered, but he was far away on the other side of the Douve. By the time he or his team reached us, any initial anger would have cooled. The king would certainly understand the passions of the young. Then word came that the king's party was coming through the Douve, and it became apparent that we could suffer the king's wrath. Further, that his emissary would be here sooner than anticipated. Any perturbance to my chastity now would look planned and be a blatant insult to His Majesty. Father realized something else. Unlike the Duke, he had another shot at power. More power. The other families of dead Selectresses had all been heavily compensated and given a voice at court. Father had no other heirs, and mother refused to die so he could marry again to obtain some. What did father expect to get upon my death? My mother's death too? A pretty young wife and a nursery full of heirs to replace me? As for me, I could only hope my death would be pretty and painless. That I would look like a princess while I lay in state and was then carried to be buried in the royal tomb. I looked down at my hands again. No matter how beautiful I was, the king wouldn't take a chance of me producing a deformed heir. The scent of rose filled the air, carried on a whiff of smoke. Of course, it was past rose season. Father was burning the Douve rose. The whole castle was perfumed with the scent. The outcast girl, Maisie, had brought it to him. I'd seen her in the great room while she waited for her audience with father. We'd played together as children. For a brief time. Until father found out about it. Then mother had taught me it was better, safer, for Maisie and her family as well as for us, if I ignored her. If I forgot I'd ever known her. She probably thought I was arrogant when I passed her by, unacknowledged. But really, I'd been protecting her. Since her arrival, and since she'd turned over the rose, I'd been careful not to eat or drink anything that Mariah hadn't carefully screened for me. Yes, I'd heard the rumors that Morel had pronounced the rose poisoned with dark magic. I didn't think father would be desperate enough to try the rose magic on me, to rid me of my little stubs of extra fingers, not when it was now rumored to be contaminated by a darkling. He could have ruined me and made a real monster of me. Even damaged as I was too valuable an asset to risk. But I took no chances. Father had sent plenty of his men after the rose. Fearless, well-trained soldiers and guards. They'd fended off the rest of the villagers, but had come home empty-handed. How had Maisie defeated them? Father had been furious. He'd been intent on making me even more beautiful, with 2 5-fingered hands and no curse. As an added benefit, he meant to prevent any other young woman from using the rose to her benefit. Then Maisie had dumped the rose right into his lap, and all it had cost him was a gold coin and a tiny bottle of his prize whiskey. Nothing at all, really. First thing this morning, he'd sent proclamations to the village to be posted conspicuously and abundantly. They stated that the reward had been claimed and the rose was being destroyed because it had been poisoned by the touch of a darkling. Even now, the scent of the burning would perfume the village, as well as be proof of the rose's destruction. Mariah told me as she was dressing me for bed last night that the witch Morel had paid father a visit after Maisie left, warning him to bury it, and offering to take it off his hands. Father had been wily enough not to trust her. He had consulted with his own magician, who recommended burning it at sunrise. We could only hope father's magician was correct. There was a light tap on the door. Mariah entered with my breakfast tray. She closed the door with her hip and set the tray in front of me. The king's entourage arrived late last night, my lady. Their carriage and horses are in the stable, along with a contingency of soldiers. Lord Noblet is your father's guest. He was expecting to see you at breakfast, but your father won us some time, pleading the unexpected early arrival so that you can beautify yourself. Everyone understands the importance of the first impression you make on him. Thank you, Mariah. So that was what caused the commotion that woke me in the middle of the night. I had hoped there was another explanation. How do they look, these men who braved the Douve? Are they monsters now? Hardly, my lady. She blushed, which meant at least one of the men had already been flirting with her, trying to pry information about me from her. Why did they arrive so late? I asked, more to myself than her. It's horribly rude. Were they chased out of the Douve by the monsters therein? They made their excuses, saying only that the king is eager for his new fiancée, so all haste had to be made to get here. I looked at her sharply. Her blush deepened. They appear in good spirits, laughing and joking. None of them seemed the least frightened by their journey through the woods. That meant nothing good. It was practically an admission that the Fairy Queen had protected them. They looked perfectly fine, Very fine, if you will, Mariah said on a wistful breath. Beautiful, each of them. They have the scullery and lower maids a twitter. I bet they did. All the maids and staff have been warned to stay away from them. Good for our housekeeper for watching out for our staff. The new arrivals all think highly of themselves. Mariah wrinkled her nose, showing her good sense despite her apparent immediate infatuation with them. A tumble with one of our kind is likely beneath them. A tumble is almost always beneath the man, I said dryly. Mariah didn't bother blushing or admonishing me. Your father wants you primed and looking gorgeous. The maroon silk, I think. I nodded. Father hopes Lord Noblet will take one look at me and make his decision immediately, not even bothering to look further. He's under no obligation to look further, Mariah said. I overheard him telling the Earl. The king apparently gave Lord Noblet complete power to make the selection at his discretion. Your father looked pleased. Father would send me to my marriage bed so easily. We both knew I meant he'd send me to my death. The very real thought of throwing this interview had crossed my mind more than once. Make myself as ugly as possible. Laugh like a hyena. Make stupid comments. Come down dressed hideously. But father would kill me then, or worse. And whatever punishment he meted out wouldn't be pretty in any way. Death might even be preferable. Mariah picked up my hairbrush. I picked up my fork. Let the condemned eat their last meal in freedom. I fought to appear calm, but my mind was furiously trying to think of a way to escape my fate.